Thank you so much, Gordon. We appreciate all that you shared. Very good, great content, good food for thought, and appreciate you taking the time out here with us. We do have several questions that we have received ahead of time. If you do have a question, you can go ahead and send it to me in the chat box there. We do have several questions, so there is a probability that we will be unable to get to every question. So Gordon is free to talk until 1 a.m. his time. So you can call him directly if you want to for any questions here. All right. So here we go, Gordon. Here's the first question. Uh, and you've hit on some of these in your presentation here, but we'll ask it. Can a couple that has been married before become an elder when the Bible says the elder should be the husband of one wife?
Well, I think I've already answered what I think about that and why I think that. Uh, Now, there's a question in First Timothy. It mentions the wives, and so the qualifications for wives that comes up in several parts of the discussion. But unless that applies to elders' wives, there are no qualifications given for elders' wives. And yet, if you go back to the early days of our movement, Pat Gimple was married and divorced early on before she married Bob. And Bob was appointed as an elder in Boston way back with Al Baird. And then later I was appointed and joined the two of them. And I know other elders that do have divorce in their past before becoming Christians. And I don't have a problem with that personally for the reasons that I've already noted. My question is their marriage since becoming a Christian exemplary? Are they a one woman man? And are they an example that other people can look to and say, I want to have a marriage like that? And if they have that, I think they're qualified.
All right, thank you. Second question, again, you have hit on some of these things, but we do want to get them answered here. Does it matter if the couple was married and divorced before they became Christians?
Well, I think I covered that in the other. Uh, I don't think so. What I, I judge people when we become disciples, we basically say that we start over, right? And so, whatever sin it is that we have in our past, including God does hate divorce. He does say that, right? So I think the divorce that they had was sin, but I think all the other things they did as non-Christians was sin as well. But when they're baptized into Christ, they get a new beginning, and I think that applies to the marriage status as well.
And again, sorry, but I know you've answered this. Do you believe that all the children have to be faithful Christians?
Well, as I've said, the word pistos gives you about equal opportunity to interpret it one way or the other. I do think it could mean something that Timothy doesn't mention that and Titus does. And if you look at that verse, I think you could look at the first and second part of it as saying essentially the same thing, that you don't want to consider someone as an elder who has wild and disobedient kids and doesn't show the earmarks of parenting that has helped them be a basically good person. There are many churches that interpret it that way, uh, and there are all kinds of variations that can come up. I knew a family once that with 5 children, 4 of them were solid citizen disciples. The other one never got baptized, but he was a really good guy, had a wonderful relationship with his parents, and yet he never got baptized. I would look at someone like that and say, well, are we really going to be that squeaky clean about it, so that he's got 4 that are disciples and 1 that is not, and yet the relationships are great with the family. He's a good, solid citizen. He's not wild or unruly or any of the things there that Titus mentions. Would we really feel like it has to be a certain way? I mean, I've heard people say, well, can someone be an elder that has only 1 kid? Because if they got only 1 kid, then that is that children who believe? Well, Sarah, Abraham's wife, would say yes. She said in one case, who would have ever thought that I would nurse children, plural, because the plural includes the singular from a grammatical standpoint. But people have said, well, if they only have 1 child, then they really didn't know how to deal with sibling rivalry and all of that. Well, then you could say, well, what about Al and Gloria Baird? They only had girls. They didn't ever raise a boy. So how could they know how to shepherd boys? I mean, we can get to the point that we get legalistic about it. And to me, I would want to look at the family as a whole, and I would want to look at the relationships within that family, and I would want to ask the question, have they shown that they have basically good parenting skills, and have they shown that especially in the church with God's family? And if they've demonstrated it in the church with God's family, that's what being an elder is. That's what it's about. And so all of us keep those kids around till they're about 18 years old and they're gone. So who are we after they've gone? Are we good at parenting skills, talking about parenting God's family, because that's what the role actually is? So I would say on that one, again, it's like the husband of but 1 wife or the one woman man. It has been interpreted differently by different people, but I'm more going to end up focusing on, do they have the skills to parent God's children? And they might have gotten some help in some other ways. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that have been in all kinds of different training, grief training, all kinds of different training that has given them a lot of skills that are directly applicable to parenting, in that sense, God's children. And so where they got those skills from and when and all of that, I'm looking more at what's actually there that's going to be used in the functional work of being an elder. So I'm pragmatic a bit on this, because I don't like to take those passages and reduce them into a checklist of qualifications. I don't think that was Paul's idea.
And so, as a follow up to this question, what if someone's kids that they were disciples, or they were believing, or respectable, however, let's say in their, I don't know, late 20s or 30s, they no longer are believers, or they have now decided to live maybe a wild life? Do you believe that if someone had been an elder, let's say for 10 years, and then this happened to their kids, does that now disqualify them for being an elder?
That's a good question, and it certainly comes up. The way I have looked at it, if you take the stricter view of pistos, meaning a believer, rather than the other alternative, if you take the stricter, more conservative view of that, then my thought on that through the years for a long time has been, you're going to find out more about how the parenting job worked when they first get out of the home. And so I've seen kids that were in the church and then they go off to college and become something very different. To me, that's one thing. And then another thing is they're 40 years old and married with their own family and all of that. And at age 40, they leave God, leave the church, whatever, And some people say, well, if they leave at any time, then that disqualifies the elder. Again, children are free moral agents. They are creatures of choice. And so what a 40-year-old does is a whole lot different to me than what a 17 or 18-year-old kid does. And so I would not say that what a child does at age 40 would disqualify someone any more than it says the husband of but one wife. Well, what if the wife dies? What if Gloria Baird dies? There's, if you look at it on the squeaky clean legalistic viewpoint, Al would have needed to resign when Gloria died, which would have been a tragedy. It's not about looking at it legalistically. Al had many years as a great husband with Gloria, and she passed away, and he is no less qualified to be an elder now. Now, would it be better if he had a wife on some of the things that he could do with a wife that he may not be able to do now? Sure, but it doesn't disqualify him. What if someone had a couple of children and they were believers, or whatever you want to say about that qualification, and they tragically got killed in a car accident, and so now he no longer has children who believe? From a purely technical standpoint, does that disqualify him? Of course not. That's not the whole purpose of it. It is a checklist. So I think we've got to kind of question how we are looking at that, but it's a judgment call. I have known people that felt like they needed to step down if their children left at any time. And I've seen others that did not feel that because they viewed their children as having, proved whatever they needed to prove for a lot of years. And now they made a bad choice as a very mature adult. Does that make the elder disqualified? And I would say, in my opinion, case by case basis, you'd have to consider it. A part of it would be even how the flock looks at it. But to me, it's not a cut and dried legalistic way that I would look at it. I would say case by case on that one.
And then a question here, two parts to it. I'm going to summarize briefly here some that were sent to me. Jesus obviously was not married, yet he's called the chief shepherd. And so can a brother be an elder if he is not married or never been married? So that's part A of the question. And then what is the role of a wife in helping and counseling couples and sisters as an elder's wife?
Okay, the second one's easier to answer, I think, and that is that because they are married and the marriage is held up as a part of the qualities or qualifications, then she would be involved with the husband in dealing with marriage issues and all of that. So I would say that an elder's wife should have some skills, just from a purely practical vantage point, should have some skills that would help her to relate to women well and to do some marriage counseling or whatever else. It's sort of like, what are the qualifications of an evangelist? I have a list of things that I think are pragmatically important that I have in my book, but I couldn't necessarily point to a passage that says, here's exactly what those qualifications are. I've just learned experientially that an evangelist is going to have to do certain things in our society in the 21st century in America. And so an evangelist needs to have certain capabilities that might not have been important in the 18th century, but they are now. So on the elder's wife, I would say that. Typically, we haven't really entertained a single person being an elder because of the family qualifications. And so I would say, just from the standpoint of not having any biblical example of that, and finding some ways that that could limit fairly significantly what they're able to do in families. Without that experience, I would say that I wouldn't lean toward having a single actually appointed as an elder, and yet I would certainly uh, totally support, encourage every way I could having mature singles, even helping train them to be shepherd types to help within the singles ministry. And they might have married friends they could help as well, just from a discipling standpoint or people helper standpoint as well. So that one, I would not probably jump into the idea of having someone officially appointed as an elder because of the family qualifications.
Is there a certain amount of number of elder couples a church should have per number of Christians in a church to maintain healthy shepherding?
As many as we can get. We have been low in the number of elders that we've had. When I became an elder in Boston, I mean, we were counting a lot of what are now outlying churches as a part of the Boston church. But goodness, we had 3,000 members for three couples. That was like drinking out of a fire hydrant. It was pretty overwhelming. So I think after we went through some of the challenges that we had in the early part of this century, we all recognized that we needed more elders. I think there were churches, because of recognizing that need, that rushed into it in a few cases. I knew of some situations where I think they rushed into that a bit early, which I did not want to do when I went to Phoenix. We took a while to get elders appointed there, but we definitely made it a priority and got them appointed. But I think my bigger concern has been that we've tended to look, in my judgment, my term, we've tended to look at the qualities as legalistic qualifications. And it, again, as Wyndham said, we've had impossibly high standards for appointing someone. And yet we've put a ton of people into evangelist roles and other roles when they had tremendous amounts of responsibility, and yet we didn't always vet them very well. I love evangelists, but there have been some that I've dealt with, and I've thought to myself, how did they ever get in this role? Uh, and so we've not had a problem. The whole point by comparison is we've not seemingly had a problem with people in other leadership roles that may not have been tested very much and experienced very much. We've seemed to be okay with that. But then when it comes down to having elders, it's like, trying to strain a camel through whatever the illustration is. I forgot it. But anyway, you get the point. We've been too conservative, I think, on that one. My biggest question is going to be, is this person the kind of person that you want to be a shepherd? You think they generally, and all the things that we've looked at, they're qualified to be, and they got a heart to be a shepherd couple and all of that. To me, that's what I'm looking at more than I am at some checklist. That's Gordon speaking. I'm an old guy, though, and I've seen a lot of water under the bridge.
All right. What is the process, or you think should be the process, of becoming an elder? How are they nominated, and who makes the final decision?
Wow, that's several chapters in my book, Dynamic Leadership. I think I have some of those articles, by the way, on my website. I have two different websites. GordonFerguson.org is my basic teaching website. I think I have some articles on there about those questions. And since we went through it from the beginning in Phoenix, that was a pretty good case study of how it could be done. Boston, they had an eldership for some years before I became a part of it, but Phoenix, I was a part of helping it get established. But that's the question's a good one, but it's too involved for me to answer it in a brief fashion here. But GordonFerguson.org, I think you can find the answers to those very questions there, with Phoenix used as an example of how we did it. So that would be helpful to you there.
Sorry, there you go. All right. If someone served as an elder in one of our ICOC churches, but moved to another ICOC church, how long do you suggest you wait to appoint them as elders in their new church?
Wow, that's a case by case judgment there. I would expect that in Phoenix, when Al and Gloria Baird moved there, you know, Al had been an elder longer than anyone else. He and Bob Gimple were appointed together in Boston way back in the day.
He's already in.
I expect he got appointed fairly quickly in Phoenix because people outside Phoenix knew the Bairds. So they were known in Phoenix already before they ever moved there. So that one I suspect was fairly brief. On the other hand, if an elder who is not known in a church moves into a church, the church would need to get to know them some to have confidence in them. And so you would have to give that some time. That's a reasonable thing, to give people time to sort of assess, is that a person that we feel like does have the qualities to be an elder? And usually if they do, it becomes evident fairly soon. And of course, you would always, I like to check with the original congregation whether they served in a leadership role or not. I want to know about someone moving into my church. What were they like in the church from which they moved? So that always ought to be a phone call, to talk to some leaders in the earlier church to find out how they did there. So I'm not saying we ought to just vet a leader, but also check up a bit on the people that are coming in to make sure that we can meet their needs and help them, and know from the get-go sort of what they're like and what they will need as a part of our congregation. So case by case basis.
And someone asked if, let's say someone got restored, would that qualify or would that disqualify them since they had left the Lord but got restored? Would they be able to become an elder?
Well, in the qualification list that we looked at, it talks about not appointing someone too quickly. In fact, that's mentioned also in 1 Timothy 5 about not laying hands on someone, talking about an appointment too quickly. So I would say that just like a newer convert, you'd have the same kind of period of being able to judge their solidity as a disciple and qualities as an elder. You'd want to have some time for that, again, case by case basis. But I think that would be important. I know in talking about Jerry Jones, who was the elder who had been with me in Phoenix, when we appointed him, he was actually a fairly new Christian, but he didn't have a pride problem at all. He's one of the most humble guys in the world, and we all of us that knew him felt like he could be appointed even as a fairly young Christian. But his qualities were so outstanding that no one questioned that. We didn't have anyone question that because his qualities had gotten known fairly quickly, even as a fairly young Christian. They had really applied themselves to learning the Bible and loving the church. And so case by case, we considered whether to appoint him quickly as a part of the original 5 that we had or not. But the thing that would disqualify him biblically was a new convert could be trouble with pride in an influential role. And Jerry Jones did not have any noticeable pride before or after his appointment. He was one of the most humble elders I've ever served with. So again, we're going to get back to case by case there, but a restoration, I'd certainly want to give them some time and see how they did on that one, just like I would a newer convert.
All right, thank you. Just a couple more here. What would you consider to be a recent convert? Is it 3 years, 5 years? What would that be?
Well, again, I'm going to keep saying case by case. A lot of it depends on age, uh, experiences in life, maturity that goes with all of that. There are some people, if you look back in the New Testament, Paul went on the second missionary journey and established all these churches. He goes right back through there in not too long a time and appoints elders in the churches. And people wonder, how in the world did he establish an eldership that quickly in these churches? And the normal answer is because they converted Jews to start with. That was the majority of people converted early on would be Jews, and they had roles in the synagogues that was very much like the role of an elder in the church. And so you had mature spiritual believers in the one God, believers in what we call the Old Testament, that had a lot of experience before they got baptized into Christ. They could be appointed quickly. And so let's say that you baptize someone that had been very involved in some other church, but had never had a biblical conversion, but they had been very involved even in leadership in another church, and they get baptized. That's someone that you could appoint a lot more quickly than someone that came out of the world totally without much of a spiritual religious background. And so that's something to be factored in there. So I would say a lot of it's the personality, the experience, the age. Jerry, that I'm using as an example now from the Phoenix days, Jerry was he was older. He was a career Navy man. He had had a lot of life experience. He read people like a book. How much of that started off as street smarts? Probably a lot, but he didn't have a religious background. But after he got baptized, he was all in. He studied the Bible. He read books. I mean, that guy read every book that I ever wrote, that's for sure, and a lot of other people's books. He applied himself to making up for lost time. And so he learned a lot in a hurry, and he had life experience and family experience, and the guy just had a lot going for him and got appointed. I don't know, he had been a Christian 2-3 years, I'm guessing, something like that. 3 years. I'm guessing at that, but we had no problem with it. And he didn't have any religious background, but people with a lot of religious background might be qualified sooner.
All right, we got I think room for one more here, and the question is, I know we talked about, but it's slightly different. Let's say a brother was divorced as a Christian, and then he got remarried as a Christian. Would he be qualified to be an elder?
Okay, that is a question that comes up. One woman man, I list in my book, I list 4 possibilities of how to look at a one woman man, that qualification. And one of them is that as long as their divorce was for biblical reasons, which would be their mate was unfaithful or their mate deserted them and left the church. First Corinthians 7 or Matthew 19 parallels on the adultery situation. If they had a biblical divorce and remarriage, even after they were Christians, could they then serve as an elder? And my thought on that is I would look at that on a case-by-case basis. I'm not going to look at any of it as a checklist, legalistic type thing. But on that one is a little further removed and raises more question marks. So I would want to know, okay, in the marriage that they now have, how long have they been married? If the divorce and remarriage took place 20 years ago, that would be a lot different than 3 years ago, in my judgment, just looking at it purely from the standpoint of how has their marriage dynamic been proved. So how long, how good their marriage is that they're in now, how blatant was the marriage problem that caused the divorce? Is it clear that it was for a biblical reason or not? All those factors would play in. And so that's why you keep hearing me say, and maybe you're tired of it by now, but that's why I keep saying case by case basis, because that's about how we look at most every leadership role, right? We look at someone we're thinking about appointing as an evangelist. We look at the whole package. We don't have a list to check off. We look at the person as a whole. And experience-wise, age-wise, background, family. We look at a lot of things in any leadership role. And I'm in favor of doing the same thing with the elder role. And that's why I say you've got to look at a broader scope of it than simply a checklist.
All right, one last one. In our church, at least, and maybe in Los Angeles here, most of the elders are not paid. Do you feel like we should have more paid elders?
I love having paid elders. I've been a paid elder myself. That's what I was, what Wyndham was, but we had a number of fellow elders that were not on staff. But I would like to see us have as many as we can. But again, that's sort of the size of the group, the funds that are available, the ministry needs in general. And sometimes you have to make a judgment. I've seen churches that had a full-time teacher on staff that probably didn't have a paid elder on staff. And again, the nature of the work, what they bring to the table, etc. I have a website called Black Tax and White Benefits on racial issues. A paid teacher, we have a lot of teachers that are not on staff, but a paid teacher is Michael Burns. And I don't know that they have a paid elder on staff in Minneapolis. I don't know. I don't think they do, but I don't know for sure. But I'm really glad they have Michael on as a paid teacher. I think the guy is phenomenal in the whole racial area. I saw he's white and his wife is black. He has a post on Facebook saying to his wife, happy loving day. And that's not, we're in love day. It's Loving versus Virginia. That was 1967 on this date, when the law against interracial marriage was struck down, shortly before a certain movie came out that was very popular back in the day. But at any rate, Michael's a phenomenal guy, and I think he's been so helpful on all issues racially. So I'm glad that they chose to have a teacher paid, even if they don't have an elder that's paid. You've got to kind of judge what the the group is like, what are the greatest needs that they can meet, etc. But in general, I would say I would love to see paid elders. In Phoenix, I was serving as an evangelist or a teacher. That was the main hat that I wore, even though I was an elder. But it was great to have Jerry and Karen as non-paid elders in every elders meeting. I mean, they were just like being paid as far as they were able to participate because they were retired. They participated fully as though they had been paid elders. That's a tremendous asset, and it was for us and was for me as a guy who was trying to lead a church through some turmoil during those years. So I'd love to see more paid elders, but I would just love to see more elders, period. And so hopefully some things that I said, I think if we looked at things in more the way of qualification, present qualifications than history, I think we might be able to appoint more elders. That would be my thought and my hope.
Thank you, Gordon, so much. Appreciate you answering so many questions. I know people still had questions. We put his website on there so you can contact Gordon